Almost there. How was your midterm, guys? Can you tell me how it went? How did it feel? I haven't seen them yet, so I want to hear what you guys, how do you think it went? What's your gut feeling? You can throw it in the chat or you can speak up.
I think it went fine.
Yay!
I took the whole time though, but then that's just me because I like to make sure that I got everything down. But I'm just proud of myself because I finished it. So
good, good. Anybody else? Did anybody have a terrible time with it? Terrible, awful time. I guess another good question is, did anything feel surprising? Because that I don't want. I don't want a surprising. Yay. Not too bad. Cool. Okay. So what's our plan for today? I did not prepare a bunch of really fun stuff because I figured two things. One, we are going to spend some time at the end talking about final questions. And two, I want you guys to talk to me today or chat to me today. So what we're focusing on today is we did week E, which was eroticization. And we talked about feminism and the three waves of feminism. And we also talked about, I thought of this title as I was curating all the material for you guys, but the idea of like, how did pop, dance, and being a diva evolve in the dance world over the past few hundred years in America as it relates to jazz dance. So that's why I saved Josephine Baker for this week, even though you might have been wondering where she was a couple weeks ago when we were in the 1920s and 30s, because I thought she fit in here really nicely. And the other theme that I really wanted us to focus on today is this idea of how sexuality in particular is often a way in which we identify ourselves within our society and culture, like either the using of sexuality or the performing of sexuality or not, because we have a pretty short next week topic right on LGBTQ rights. So we'll be talking about gender identity and sexuality in that context, and then looking at some of the jazz dance and dance works that are representing those things in that context. So that's sort of the bridge I want us to get to today. So you guys ready for a poll? Poll about this week's fun stuff. These are some, I think we might even take this poll twice today, because I feel like some of these questions you're going to feel, maybe start out feeling uncertain about how to answer them, just because they're really relative. And then maybe we'll take them again later and see if you have changed your mind or if you feel really the same way, because they're totally just opinion questions, a lot of them. Polling away. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I'm gonna pull up some videos while you guys are there. I should do this the easy way. that. And three out of 11. Okay, you guys are doing boo, 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 boo. 4 out of 12. I'm going to ask you guys in a moment also what your favorite video for this week is. So go ahead and type that into chat, please. Yes.
From the Library of Congress in Washington.
Oh yeah, this is that terrible thing I'm looking for. Did that guy, that made you really excited to see this video, right?
In Washington, D.C.
All right, 10 out of 12, sweet. Okay, I'm gonna screen share. So let's start with let's start with back in time. So let's look at a couple of tiny little dances about skirt dancing. So I didn't assign you guys a giant article about quote unquote skirt dancing, but I did give you guys some videos of like modern day version of Cancan, for example. So one of the things that I wanted to make clear, because we skipped that article, was that Cancan dancing, there was some quality Cancan dancing, right? I showed you some good stuff, but there was also the version of it that was getting copied by random people in America because it was like the thing that you could do on stage to make some money. So here's an example of that.
DC.
So this is, it's called, for whatever reason, the Betsy Ross dance, as in the lady who sewed our flag. And this is like what you would have seen in a vaudeville or a variety act, where a young woman is dancing in a skirt. She's showing an awful lot of leg for the time, right? Because this is probably early 1900s. And she's trying to be on point. See right there, she's like going up on point as though she is a ballerina. But you can tell by the way that she doesn't straighten her toe all the way in line with her leg, and that she's like not really on them, that she's got point shoes, but she's not a ballet trained dancer. It's pretty awful, I would say. But people liked it enough to bother making a film of it. It was available, and hopefully she could make some money, right? She can just barely get up. Oh, she's tippy-toeing. Yeah? So when we start this discussion about people talking about whether dance is high art or low art, whether, and this would have been considered quite, I mean, she's got a little girl look going on, but she's showing a lot of leg, even though she's of course wearing tights in this time for basically the end of the Victorian era, right? So this would have been just barely acceptable, but still you wouldn't take this girl home to meet your mom. Yeah. So here is another
From
similar
the Library
version
of Congress in Washington, D.C.
with a little bit more choreography, right, and talent. So these girls are wearing, are they wearing pointe shoes? They look hard. Can't quite tell yet. But they're basically doing a semi-acrobatic version of Cancan. They've got high kicks, they've got ruffle skirts, they're showing off their legs, and they're doing set choreography.
This has been a presentation of the library.
So, and then you have the beginning in around 1905, 1910, you have the very beginnings of modern dance. And so at modern dance is a whole nother subject that we're not covering in this class. But the thing to know about it is that there were women who were trying to turn dancing into not just an entertainment, but to start to make quote unquote art out of it. And this sort of falls in between. So she's doing can-can moves, she's doing the ruffling of the skirts, but she's actually coming up onto her pointe shoe, and it's integrated with Niagara Falls film behind. So she's trying, this woman is trying to make bridge the gap between entertainment and art. Yeah? Okay. Oh, we saw that one too. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about what was going on at that time. So I'm going to come to our poll question. I'm going to scooch down because I want to know about number 4. I can share with you. That's cool. Okay, so for number 4, which is our question, in 1900 America, do you think that women could vote? 8% said yes. Women could not vote in America in 1900. However, there was one exception to the rule, and that was Wyoming, because until 1920 in America, women's voting rights were determined by each state. And when we got the amendment in the Constitution, that's what made it okay for everybody. So to be clear, white women could vote, not all women. But I was researching today and I realized that Wyoming was, in fact, the first state that gave us the right to vote. And that was in 1840. I don't remember off the top of my head. Women could own property in 1900 America. That is 42% people said yes. And that is true, but it was only true for about 50 years at that point. So it was mid-century that women were able to own property. Women could gain a line of credit. 33% of you guys said yes, in 1900 women could gain a line of credit. No. Women could not get a line of credit until 1970 in this country. 1970. You had to have your husband sign off in order to get credit in this country until 1970, which is just, that was my mind blower of the day. Women could gain access to contraceptive devices. No, that was illegal. So in 1960, we had the birth control pill, but we had condoms and diaphragms from much earlier. So diaphragms became available in about the 19-teens. Hence, some of the sexual freedom that we saw increased in the 1920s and 30s. But it was illegal. So the beginning of Planned Parenthood actually had to do with some of those questions of the women who started. The first contraceptive clinic was in New York City in 19-teens, and it got shut down and raided by the cops 3 or 4 times. And that's how it became a political movement. It's just because this lady was trying to help women not be constantly pregnant. Because if you have literally no contraceptive, then that means you're pregnant like every other year. I got to tell you, it's really hard work. Much as we want this to happen here. So, when we think about what those lack of rights mean, of course, that always brings stuff back to economy, right? So if you're thinking about being a woman in the turn of the century, like for example, that either of those dances that we just saw, and you can't own the place where you live, without a husband. You can't take out a line of credit, so you can't get a mortgage. You can't stop yourself from getting pregnant if you are with someone and sexually active. Think about what that does for, I mean, I think it's important to just remind us about the intersectionality of the situation, right? So it's bad enough if you were that white girl in the first picture who maybe got married at 16 and who knows whether her husband is helping the household or not, right? Because life is hard, even in real days, right? Or maybe he went away to World War I and never came back. How can that woman make a living or ever get herself out of poverty? You can't, you just can't, right? So when there's an opportunity to do something that pays you more because you're doing something that is considered scandalous or taboo, for example, wearing short skirts, that's a hard question, and it's a hard question that exists today. And it's an even more pertinent of a question from an intersectionality viewpoint if you are not only a white woman in that situation, but a person of color in that situation in America, where you're also going up against institutionalized racism. You can't get the same jobs or get paid the same pay as the white woman. It's an even worse situation, right? So that's an important starting point for this section, because we have to understand that in every time throughout the past 200 years in our country, when a woman puts her sexuality on stage, there is an economic impetus that is lying on top of stuff, right? That like, the difference is not, can I have some extra flowers at the end of the show? The difference is, can I feed my children at the end of the show, right? Okay, so that said, now that we watched some mostly not good skirt dancing, I'm gonna give you a tiny treat. We'll see if you guess why it's a treat. I'm not gonna tell you, maybe. Ha ha ha. Okay, so then we were talking about music halls, right? So like, what does music hall look like? And what is old school burlesque? Because it used to be not just what we think about, like we think about burlesque revival right now. When you think about Burlesque the movie, it's mostly jazz dance with a couple of scenes of burlesque in it. But originally burlesque in the like 100 to 200 years ago was comedy, cross-dressing, sexual innuendo, and maybe something as scandalous as can-can dancing. And to us, I think can-can dancing doesn't look very scandalous at all, but there was always this rumor because of the way that your underwear worked in the Victorian times, which was basically like, I'm thinking about my sweater right now and whether I can demonstrate. So you tie it on, old-fashioned underwear for women. You would tie it on, I'm gonna try and demonstrate just to make you guys laugh. You would tie it on like an apron, right? Haha, really funny with my baby bump. And then the underparts go under your legs. No, this isn't quite it. So that would be like a diaper, but it doesn't work like that. It goes around this way and ties here. Ah, there, we did it, okay. So here's my sweater, underwear. And look in the back, it's open. Because when you have all these big skirts on in the Victorian era and you want to go to the bathroom in an outhouse, you need to be able to just floop it up and squat. You can't be pulling things down in a corset. It just don't work. That was your entertaining demonstration for the day. Okay, so that said, if you think about the way that those kind of old-fashioned underwear worked, and then think about can-can dancing, there is a chance that you're gonna see everything, right? Big kick, underwear that don't close, there is a chance that you'll see everything. So that kind of like raises the scandal level a little bit. So here is your treat. Here is a mostly historically accurate can music hall. Whew, that screen share doesn't seem like it's worked. Let me reboot that one. Cancan. So this is what Cancan would have been like in England. This is a historical reenactment troupe, so they are pretty authentic. And if it's hard to understand why this would be considered sexual, maybe seeing the guy in the kilt and what we think about kilts and under things going on kind of gives you a hint of what people would have been hoping to see. It looks pretty innocent to us now, I think, right? So in this scenario, most of these performers, the kilt, most of these performers, if this were in real life, would have been dancing at the music hall and questionably also sex workers. Certainly polite society would have considered that all of these women would have been available for sale after the show. Whether that's true or not is probably about as accurate as whether or not we think that a stripper is available for sale after the show and to what degree, right? So like most strippers don't make money from dancing on the stage. They have to make money from doing lap dances afterwards. And then there's the question of, is there other stuff going on that's even less legal? In San Francisco, there's also like, don't touch the client, but you can touch your coworkers kind of sexuality that's permitted, depending on whether or not you sell alcohol. So all of those things together get blended in terms of women's reputations, women's sexuality, and then since women don't have any rights, they can't afford a lawyer. If someone takes advantage of these women, there's no one really to stand up for them, right? At this time in America, and I should have the date for this question. But at this time in America and England, there were, for example, no laws against raping your wife. If you had a wife and you wanted to have sex with her, she had to acquiesce even if it was violent, right? And we know for sure that domestic violence and domestic rape still goes on today, but hopefully now there are more rules that help save us from that. But it's still like terribly enforced, which brings us kind of to that question of defund the police or abolish the police that's going on right now. Is like when you bring a cop into a domestic violence situation, generally the person being abused is going to be so freaked out by the cop being there that they will just back off and try to de-escalate the situation and therefore not get the person who was hurting them arrested or prosecuted because it feels too scary and dangerous, right? It's like the evil you know, for example, is what gets stuck with. So that's one of the questions about abolish the police right now, is that maybe it shouldn't even be a police officer who shows up at that time in that situation. Certainly in the time of Cancan and 100 years ago, women who were trying to maybe they just started out just wanting to be on stage, but there was really no protection for them in terms of whether or not you could keep it to that, right? Okay, so I'm looking at your chats. Yay. Oh, good. All right. So when we think about what happened, right, that video time music hall is leading us up until approximately World War I, and then we switch over from there to jazz dance. And we see sort of Josephine Baker's take on taking that kind of empowerment where you are economically empowering yourself by putting your sexuality out there. She did amazing things with the idea of flipping stereotypes. So we talked about flipping minstrel stereotypes previously, right? How the Whitman sisters and also Bojangles would take these tropes and get on stage because people wanted to see these tropes, but then they would add another layer of intelligence. So Josephine Baker's Banana Dance, did everybody watch that? I'm gonna just put it on in the background maybe since I have this uploaded. What I think is most interesting about the Banana Dance is actually what is not there. Or what isn't her doing, but what other people are doing on the stage was the thing that really stood out to me. Okay, I am screen sharing. Banana Dance is running. So look down at the bottom center stage. There's these men who are supposedly maybe part of her tribe who are sitting there about to maybe play drums, it's hard to tell, to entertain this white man in a safari hat who's clearly a colonialist.
The famous banana dance,
and he's just like hanging out waiting to be served.
It was probably shown
like, what is that?
Film before the main feature.
I had never expected that to be part of the famous Banana Dance. So here comes Josephine Baker, and she's doing the hip movements that are clearly coming from Africa. It's important to remember that this film was made for American audiences. So in Paris, she would not have been wearing a shirt when she performed the Banana Dance.
At a moment of musical history.
And it's also crazy that this is definitely like, there's a proto-Charleston move, and the music that she's doing it to is jazz dance for sure. So did you guys see in your Josephine Baker article the different pictures of Josephine Baker's banana skirt, which was like internationally famous? I'm trying to think of it. It's like Michael Jackson's glove famous, her banana skirt. Yeah, at the time, to give you a little context. So what I loved from that article is seeing how in this original version, the banana skirt looks like real natural bananas, right? And bananas are what? Anybody? What bananas are? Phalluses. Yes, so they are representing male genitalia. So even though you have this colonial guy laying out there saying, "Yes, woman, thou shalt please me," as he reclines upon his chaise lounge in the jungle, she's got a belt of masculine sexual energy that she is flailing at him. And not only that, if you think about the idea of, she's also wearing a big chunky necklace. And when I watched this the first time, I was reminded of, I'm looking for an image for you, the goddess Kali. Make sure I get an appropriate, here we go. And then I'm gonna screen share this picture to you. There we go. So the goddess Kali, like many other mythological images, there's this idea of a necklace or a string of your enemies all strung up. And so Kali has like a skirt of arms and a necklace of heads. And so when I saw the Banana Dance the first time, I was like, not only is she wielding phalluses at this colonial guy, it's also like, these are the body parts representing strength of my enemies that she is wielding at that colonialist image, which I just thought was mind-blowingly cool. And then I love how later on, you know, when you think about what it must have been like for her working at that time, given that we discussed how little safety these women had in terms of that they were seen by society as sexually available and that they didn't really have protection from the government or the ability to own things, that, do we have any of the modern one? There. So her Banana Dance skirt gets redesigned over time, and look how it goes from like nice, soft, inviting bananas to spikes. It's like the opposite of a chastity belt. It gets modified by popular artists, like Art Deco artists of the time, to become even more weapon-like. And I just thought that was super fascinating version of flipping the stereotype that she did. So she came onto the scene, she started living and working on the streets. She then had her period of time where she was working in vaudeville, and she did some pretty clown-like horrible blackface, but she was always the comedic dancer in the troupe. And then she becomes a superstar using this sexuality, being like super sexually out there, and she flips that on its head, eventually turning it into like, I'm using sex as a weapon for power, which I think is part of what I imagine is the key to superstardom that we see still happening in diva culture today. So like, let's switch up to modern times. Oh, I'm so excited about these like mixed feeling answers, you guys, to the other questions. Ah. Okay, I'm gonna get back to that poll thing in just a second. So I wanted to look at buttons, and I'm gonna ask you guys in chat about your personal opinion. Where are you, buttons? Hold on, guys. Boop, 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 boop. There it is, okay. Screen share on. So I discovered while I was looking for this video, which of course I had seen before, but I hadn't read about a lot. So I discovered that the Pussycat Dolls were originally a burlesque, meaning neo-burlesque, dance troupe first. And then the owner of, or the person who started, the choreographer who started the group, added in Nicole Scherzinger and turned it into a singing group so they could be popular. So my question is going to be about Snoop Dogg and what he says in this video. So the intro section, he's introducing the male gaze. Remember how last week we were talking about what is the audience? In the exoticization section, we were talking about what happens when the audience looks at a dancer, right? Because some of the questions I asked you in the poll are about like, is dancing sexually okay in public versus at home? Is it like, is sexuality something that you think should be private or not? And it's that, I think that question is sort of the line in the sand for a lot of us. And so then when you make it public, then you have someone looking at you. And that in this video is represented by Snoop Dogg. In the first scene, he says that she's sexually attractive. And what does she want him to do about it? He reaches for her, but he does not touch, right? And she's in control. But one of the things about pop music is that it's often made by the production company. So like Nicole Scherzinger in this case may have been involved in some of the lyric writing. Certainly she was involved in the video making and in the dancing and in agreeing to sing these lyrics. But then the giant corporation makes the decision of what gets edited in there. She may not have had any control whatsoever about what Snoop Dogg says in the section that comes next, right? So here we have her doing chair dancing, which goes back to Fosse. We have, right, everybody's favorite chair dance, or like the chair dance of most fame is Mein Hair, which is all about a woman saying, I took what I want from you sexually and financially, and I'm done, right? So that every time we see a chair dance,
tell you what's cracking like it before I proceed. I'm gonna show you where to put it at. PCD on me, yeah, I thought I saw a pussycat. Now roll with the big dog, all all 6 of y'all on me. Now tell me how I feel, baby doll. Ashley, Nicole, Connie, Jessica, Kimberly, Melody, you telling me?
So my question for you is, in this case, and let me be clear, I love this video. I love the dancing in this video. I love the outfits in this video. So like, I'm not coming from this from a judgy point, except for when you heard that interrupted speech from Snoop Dogg now, it's not the same conversation that he had with her in the beginning about, can I have your consent to have sex with you? He literally said, you can get what you want, but I'm gonna get what I need, AKA I'm in control. And then he said, all 6 of you on me, how's it feel? Probably not that great for them. What's he giving them, right? He's just like wearing his dumpy clothes and being cool. They don't need him. So that flip from the male gaze, looking at the empowered women that we started with, and then like they're still super empowered here, but what was that weird interruption that corporate America plugged into there? What was that? So I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Do you have a gut reaction to that change in sort of the tone? Do you think it was necessary? Do you think, why is that the standard is really my question? And, or do you disagree with me totally? Like, no, that was always the situation, or that's not the standard, or that's not what you normally see in pop music?
It feels complicated.
It is. Correct, Stamp.
It's like, on one hand, like personally, I find it uncomfortable to watch, but I also know that for other people, reclaiming sexuality can be really empowering.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think that so much, I don't know, like in music videos and pop, it's like women, or like even just background dancers in songs, it's like they perform more sexually, or they have to dress more openly, and it's like, I don't know, if I thought about it, like, would a guy have to do this to get respect? It's like, I don't think so.
I mean, they don't. How many naked male bodies do we see? It was like Magic Mike was the only one in the last 20 years, right? Do you guys notice, I'm hoping I'm not ruining hip hop for you and pop music forever, but it's possible. Do you notice when there's that change in tone in music? Because I have so much trouble not hearing lyrics personally that it's kind of a joke around the household, because I'll be like walking through Target. I'll be like, what did they say? What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm definitely a lyrics girl. And to your point, and Florence, I think, who was just chatting, like back then, I just feel like it's like an ode to, like, in the beginning, like you said, they were chatting about her kind of owning it and being like, well, you can kind of keep your distance, but I'm going to kind of do my thing. And when I'm ready, it's always like that in pop music, where it's going to revert back to like, okay, we're going to give you yours, but then it's going to revert back to the male and being dominant. It's still like that to this day, in my opinion, if not worse in terms of lyrics, like you mentioned. I mean, I feel like that song and those lyrics were so PG, considered what you hear now in rap and what these guys are wanting to do and wanting to run. Like, oh my, I probably sound like a mom, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is intense. Like, holy crap, this is not like that back in the day. So yeah, lyrics are interesting, but it's definitely there where you hear more of a dominant male kind of taking over the songs and lyrics and, well, what they're looking to accomplish in the song.
I wonder if it's my assumption that that is still going on because of who owns the record companies. And because, right, like if you maybe didn't have the male gaze or the male taking the power verbally back in lyrics there, could you sell that as easily? Or would it be too shocking for those women to just want to feel sexy and rub themselves? does society accept it and buy it more when it's being sold to men and men say this is okay?
That's a good question. I feel like too, when women, like for example, some of the girl groups don't last as long as other groups because of that image that they are trying to portray and not kind of fitting the mold. That's why, like Pussycat Dolls, for example, they all started together and then Nicole kind of branched off, but the songs you hear her singing are more still geared towards a male featuring a male or the lyrics. So I feel like if they were to kind of gear towards that way, they wouldn't be as successful, as sad as that sounds, which does root to the music and who owns the, productions and stuff.
Because I mean, even if we as a society are ready for a woman to just be sexually empowered, that doesn't mean that the corporations are going to spend the money to make it mega popular.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make it as an artist just because you're good. You have to have a multi-million-dollar company that puts out $100,000 in advertising to become a pop star. Minimum. And that number is a number that I know from at least 20 years ago. So I'm sure it's much more now. Where did my brain go? Go ahead. What was my next thought? I had a brain fart, guys. I wanted to come back to Hamilton for a hot second, but also, let's go back to the poll question. Here, let's just run down them. So the first question was, what does your family and parents' generation think about women who dance? And our highest response numbers were, there is nothing necessarily sexual about dancing, and women's bodies are natural and beautiful, and some dancers are classy and some are trashy was option number 3. So I actually think that's it's much better than 2 generations ago, right? So would you have answered that question the same for your grandma?
No.
Oh, good, we got some laughs on that one. So we're making incremental steps forward. I remembered my thought that I was going to say. So Celia, you were saying back in the day, this is PG. It's not true. So what this is super mainstream pop lyrics, RPG. But if you think about the Pussycat Dolls, this video is from like 2005, 4, something like that. And if you roll it back further to the 1990s, you have Two Live Crew. Anybody heard Two Live Crew? Maggie's like, I'm not going to recommend that you listen to them, but they were extremely popular underground in the 1990s. And they had songs like, let me think of PG ways to put this. Doo-doo brown, that's the way we like to F, was the chorus that everybody at a party would sing about bending your female partner over and doing it in the back. So it's not PG back then, and I'm sure it wasn't PG way back then. It's just that stuff was kept so underground that it doesn't get repeated in public awareness as much. But people have been singing about doing it nasty. And people have been doing it nasty since the Roman times. At least they wrote about it. Like, it's all been there. But it's also therefore always been capitalizable, and which I think is an interesting thing about it, right? As long as stuff is taboo, then someone can be making money off of making someone else do it for money. If it's totally like, whatever, then there's no money in it. How do you feel about dancing in an outfit that covers as much as a miniskirt and a bra, a 2-piece bathing suit, and for you and or your girlfriend? Multiple choice. And I apologize, I wrote these questions really quickly, so I did not proofread them for trans and gender proper wording, but I figured we'll just leave that because we're going to talk about all of that next week for sure. So we've got one person who's into it and feels comfortable with it, I should say. It's not just into it because half of us said that we wish we were brave enough to do that. Oh, nobody said it's essentially stripping. Well, that's nice to hear. Good. But I thought it was an interesting question to put out there. And this was sort of what I was wondering if the answers were going to look like. Because so many of us, like half of us, wish we could and yet don't. And I think that conundrum is even less about you than you think it is, right? Like most of the time when people are like, well, I would, except I don't like the shape of this part of my body, or I'm too shy to do that, or I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that because what would my family think, or what would I feel like when I saw my family the next time and I knew what I did last night. All of those questions are not, they're not just coming from inside of you. They're coming in response to what society tells you all the time about the way your body should look, the way your body should be comported around the universe. All those questions are playing into this question of who's making money off of your body and how do you feel about it. It's kind of scary. Sorry, I didn't mean to make this so grim. Would you or your family accept a chorus girl or stripper into the family as a bride, assuming the happy couple were in love, right? So I didn't mean like it. I had an example I'm going to save about a certain couple that's very famous right now. I mean, like the two people actually really are in love and they want to get married because they're in love, not because he has power and she just wants a visa and some money. So okay with me, not okay with my family, 42%. A third of you said the family would just never accept that. 17% said it depends on if she's just dancing or if there's also sex work, which I think is a pretty big question. That's kind of where the line is for most folks culturally. My family would accept her over time is great. Interestingly, nobody said my family would be totally fine with that. Not even one of you. Interesting. Because, you know, some moms were strippers. There must be families out there who would be totally okay with it. We did number 4 already. Where do you fall on the question of the sex wars? Oh, I was excited to hear your guys' answers on this. I can't expand the poll. Okay, so 17% pornography is bad. 17% also pornography could be made in a healthy way. Pornography is a necessary evil, 0%. Now that's interesting because this is an anonymous poll, and I would say that probably 20 years ago, more people would have said pornography is a necessary evil than pornography is bad. So I think that's a cultural shift in our, even just in our local area. Pornography is natural. Interesting. 25%. Pornography is abusive, but sexuality is not, only 8%. And that's sort of an interesting question because it relates to the question of whether or not pornography could be made in a way that is healthy or non-abusive. Because there was I don't think you guys, I'm trying to think of where I put this article. So there's an article in the additional links that are optional that you don't have to read, but if this subject fascinates you, I wanted to stick them in there. They're kind of explicit, but they're sort of this question of the sex wars from the 1970s when the second wave feminists were like, you know, trying to get a credit card and a mortgage for women, not important at all. This question of whether sexuality is a form of empowerment, which we've just been talking about in terms of like pussycat dolls and divas, which I think most of us feel pretty positively about, versus when you cross that line into actually doing sex work where there's physical contact. That's how I'm drawing the line, but that line is squiggly, right? Like, is topless photography pornography? If you're not touching anyone, right? It's a gray area. Is all I'm saying. I'm not saying there's an answer. But can can pornography be art is part of this question. Can sexuality be, could you make a Pussycat Dolls video without any of the weird male gaze lyrics that actually had sex in it? And would that be art? Or is it immediately not art? And then the practical parts of that question are covered in the article, really, which is like worker safety, worker empowerment, removing, like allowing the workers to say at any point, like, I need a break, stop, this is no good for me anymore, because you don't just give consent at the beginning of a sexual act. And when there's money involved, it's even harder to have consent involved in that conversation, which is part of why it makes it so hard to have pornography that's not abusive, right? Because like, you sign a contract, you show up for a job, you're supposed to finish that job, but what if that job turns into rape? Right? Nobody's looking out for you if you are needing money because you can't afford a lawyer. So that's why this is so, as someone appropriately said, complicated. Okay. And also, I'm curious, because I made this a multiple choice question. I'm curious whether some of you felt like you answered both positively and negative on the pornography questions. Like, stripping is fine, but touching a stripper is not fine. 33% of you agreed with that comment. So I'm wondering if those are the same people who said, I don't approve, but I support other people's need to make money on the side, whether those two groups of question answers are together or not, because I feel like all of that stuff is really cloudy. Okay, we've gotten through our polls on the heavy stuff. I asked you guys earlier whether you, I need to move on. I'm gonna switch gears because we could talk about this forever. So I'm going to pull up the questions you've all been waiting for. I have not written your final permanently out yet, but I'm gonna give you loosely the idea of what the questions are gonna be, yeah? So, some of the things that I'm not sure about are, last time I just gave you the 3 questions and you knew exactly what they were and you studied for all 3. So I haven't decided whether to divide, to like give you 5 and have you only do 3. I might do something like that this time. And then I am gonna also put some multiple choice in to your final exam. So short answer question topics are: focus on a performer choreographer group in terms of movement, and discuss how their work reflected the obstacles that they addressed in the work. So for example, earlier today we talked about Josephine Baker's banana dance and how she was, oh, there's hammering underneath me. How she was using the movements of the African community dances that we covered in the beginning of the semester. So she's taking that desire for the savage, the eroticized vision of the savage woman, and flipping it into that she's the empowered person over the colonial person. So that could be an answer of how the movement, her thrusting at the colonial guy who's laying down, her standing over him, how the movement reflects the obstacles that they are addressing in their world. Were they authentically representing the experiences of those characters? In what ways did they work with and against or against the system? And what movement innovations did they create that influenced later jazz dances? So we saw that she was doing those community dances, but she was also showing that she was a modern woman by putting in Charlestonized versions of those steps. And it's the fact that she does both that lets us know that she's doing it on purpose, right? Because it was really, when we saw those first skirt dancers who were just like, nah, 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 I'm falling over, but you might see my crotch. Like, we don't assume from that performance that they know what they're doing. And that's one of the things that's beautiful about the way Josephine Baker took her identity took those stereotypes, offered them up to big audiences, and then said, now they're upside down. Now they're right side up. You can't put me in a box, right? Okay, focus on history. Here's another question option. Immigration. What historic events brought together the steps that became jazz dance? What contributions did each population bring? Name at least 3. Describe steps and how it related. Describe how each group came to America to contribute. So this one is like take probably something post 1920s all the way up to today, take a dance and then pick 3 contributing dances that you see in there and make me believe that you're right. So you don't need to have some article tell you that it's true. You just need to describe the movement enough that I believe that you're probably right. Yeah, so like if you're looking at breakdance, you could look at steps that we saw in the Nicholas Brothers, and you could go further back to steps that we saw in sort of like martial competitive dances. So it's your job to interpret the influences, yeah? And you don't have to be perfectly right. Focus on a theme, economic inequality. Tell us about the economic obstacles and how a famous dancer got around them. In what ways did they use the status quo to get ahead? In what ways were they stymied by the status quo? How has the status quo changed by them after their time in the limelight? So you could talk for this economic equality one about any of the themes that we talked about in terms of like fame and money, the myth of success, certainly racist stereotypes is all throughout the place in this. So it could be any of those things, but you don't have to focus on, we talked about those themes mostly in terms of like tap and early jazz dance, but you could talk about that in terms of a more modern work. So for example, you could talk about that. We talked about that a little bit today in terms of the Pussycat Dolls video, right? Like how are they using stereotypes of women to make money, and how is that both successful and empowering and also like undermined by the system? And then the final question is focus on a theme, race, LGBTQ+, gender, sexuality, etc. Tell us about the discrimination of their time and how a famous dancer dealt with those obstacles. How do they present their or their performing characters' persona on stage in relation to society's expectations? Give examples of how that was revealed in their movement dancing. In what ways did they change audiences' expectations of what we see on stage? So this coming up week, we're going to talk about gender and sexuality issues. So we're going to talk about like, how does your gender relate to identity? We're going to cover all of those terms that have just been redefined more clearly in the past 20 years. We're going to watch a little bit of Kinky Boots. We're going to talk about drag culture, ballroom. Lady Gaga is in there too, because although Lady Gaga is a cisgen white woman who I don't know if she's bi or straight, but her whole production company, House of Gaga, is a gay organization that, and has always been really publicly, right, about making LGBTQ+ positive art based on drag culture and enormous costuming. So that could be, like, you could talk about Lady Gaga's crazy costume and dancing there. You could talk about, oh, the other thing that we didn't get to in our conversation today. Celia made that great point about how some girl groups disappear really fast and others don't. So one of the things that could also go on this topic is the virgin whore paradigm, which we covered a little bit in this week's reading, and how that is used as a pop trope. So if you think about Britney Spears, there's a great example. Same shape career as Taylor Swift, same shape career as Christina Aguilera, same shape career as Madonna. You start out as a teen ingenue who is sexually available, but girl on the block. And then you get popular, and then you do your sexually empowered segment. And then what happens after that? Do you continue to make art or not? Same thing, you could maybe look at whether Lady Gaga does that or not and argue about that in this question. right? She did start out younger and sweeter, and then she was already sexually empowered in the first place, but then she went through her dark drug time. And has she recovered? I don't know. But you could talk about that. Yeah. So those are the questions as they stand. So focus on movement. Focus on immigration and how melting pots of different communities created a dance. Yeah, so movement. The first one is movement reflecting obstacles. Second one is immigration and melting pot dance steps. The third question option is economic equality. And the fourth one is on really like identity, I think is the way to talk about it. Discrimination in their time and how a famous dancer dealt with those obstacles. In what ways did they change audiences' expectations? So yeah, do you guys have questions about that? Did you read the Fosse article? Because that Fosse article demonstrates a lot of those kinds of academic arguments about like, how does dance relate to economy? How does dance relate to race? How does dance relate to melting pot? How does dance relate to empowerment of your identity? So it's a lot, but it might give you an idea of writing examples. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking and let you guys talk because we're over time and I want to let you ask me questions. Down here. Yes. Any questions? Hello.
Hi. For the final then, is it these 4 questions and then some multiple choice?
I think so, or I might have you do 3 out of 4 and you can skip 1.
Okay.
I think that's probably what I'll do. Yeah. So you can kind of plan like which 3 feel the most, that you have the most to say about. That's probably how I would make that decision. Like, oh, I totally have an idea for this. Yeah. Yes, the final, oh, you know what I forgot to ask you guys, and I'll send an email too, is do you want to, so next week is a half week for the in-person classes, but we'll, I know, right? Maggie's face is cracking me up. So that's why we only have 1 yoga class this half week, is because it ends on Wednesday, and then Thursday through Saturday is finals time. So my question is, I'm going to keep reading and watching materials as short as possible for this upcoming week. But do you want to have a check-in with me on Wednesday to go over the materials before you, and then final after that?
Yeah, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I will add an extra Zoom and let you guys ask me questions about that stuff. I think it's fun to recap. Yeah.
Would it be around the same time?
Yeah, we could do the same time, noon on Wednesday. Is that true, Amber? Look at your own calendar before you just make things up. Yeah, I have. In fact, I have already made it. I shifted it to Wednesday instead of Friday. But I'll send out an email too, just to check in with everybody. Sound good? Okay. Anything else? Is the final like the midterm? It is both like the midterm and like your quizzes. So it's both of those things together. So you'll do 3 out of the 4 questions and then also some multiple choice. Goodbye, Mo. Anything else? Okay. Bye, Ronak. All right. See you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you, Maggie.
You.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too. Thanks, Florence. Bye, Erica. Have a nice weekend. Okay.